But my area of work in the last 20 or so years has been with seahorses. And so I'm going to focus on that just a little bit, following through with what Diane says. They're a great example. The family of cygnathids or seahorses being part of that are a fantastic example of the same sort of things Diane was talking about regarding both design and degeneration. So let's just have a bit of a look at the family here. They're quite a diverse group of creatures. We've got the seahorses, of course, there. There's sea dragons that are a part of the family, pipefish, pipe horses, and a whole bunch of other creatures that I haven't got there, including pygmy pipe horses, pygmy seahorses, and a few others. So some of the features that they've got that are similar are the fused jaw. In fact, the family name cygnathid literally means in Latin fused jaw. So it's this snout that's the common feature, but they have a bunch of other features that are quite similar and therefore quite reasonable that they're in the same group, including the gill location and structure, including where the water goes out in the top of the head. So when they suck food in, food goes down into the belly and the water gets shot out through the top of the head. Sometimes you can even see a cloud of the blood from the food go out through the top of the head, which is quite interesting. And that happens in both creatures. Their pectoral fins just behind the gills there. They've also got a dorsal fin on the back, very similar in both lots of creatures. And they have appendages. So the sea dragons are very well known for their elaborate appendages, but seahorses can have them as well. The little one I've included there is an Australian species called Hippocampus breviceps, which can have some quite elaborate appendages as well. And there's other things. It's the males that hold the eggs. So the eggs are transferred from the female. That's what a female is. And the male holds them. They undergo a courtship dance when they're mating. All of them seem to do that. And they all have the ability to change colour as well. So these are some of the similar features that they have. In a book that we have on seahorse by one of the real experts on this group of animals, on the cygnathids more broadly, is Rudy Kuda, and he says this, that the leafy sea dragon is the ultimate in evolution. And what he's getting at is that they are so good at camouflaging in amongst weed in the ocean that they must have evolved this capability to hide so well, because they're a fragile creature. They've got nothing else to defend themselves with in a vicious ocean, but are still here after all these millions of years, supposedly, because they're so good at hiding. So they've evolved this capability. However, the cygnathid group does show similarities between the different groups of animals in it in many ways. And there are some animals like this one, which is called the ribbon sea dragon, that seems to have features that are intermediate between a seahorse, for example, and a sea dragon, including a partial pouch. We had these at Seahorse World, and we were quite surprised one day when one of them gave birth, because we didn't know it was pregnant. You can't really tell in this creature, whereas you can on a sea dragon, on a leafy sea dragon, or in a seahorse you can usually tell. But this one's got flaps of skin. It's almost like a half pouch on the belly, and the young were hidden in behind this. So when it gave birth, we were quite surprised, but we could see the sort of half pouch open up at this point. When I say variable cirri there, that means the appendages there can either grow or they can decline. So in a lot of the pipefish, they have no cirri, no appendages. In the sea dragons, they do. And this one is showing that they can actually grow them and lose them and grow them back again. And we do see that in some of the seahorses as well. And this is a pipefish as well that has got a prehensile tail. That means it can curl up, whereas a lot of the pipefish, they can't really curl their tails up at all, but the seahorse can as well. And I'll cover that a little bit more in detail as we go. So evolution, in summary, is basically saying that less complex animals become more complex animals. And that has to happen when you go from an amoeba through to a human by genetic information being gained in the organism. Creation is fundamentally different. We're saying that God created complex animals and that over time they become less complex or they become more specialized, but they remain within the same kind, as the Bible says, that creatures reproduced after their own kind. So genetic information has to be lost or at least modified through mutation in that process, but it's never gained. So the official line in secular evolutionary biology is that a creature changes to become better suited to its environment over time through adaptations. And this is taught in our schools, and even in a Christian school this week, a teacher was giving me examples of adaptation that she thought were quite reasonable, but really were evolutionary, and it surprised her to find that out. So we've got to be very careful when we say things are adapting, because it's really an evolutionary process that they're talking about. So is the seahorse prehensile tail an adaptation, as the evolutionists want us to believe? This is this ability to curl right up like this, which the pipefish don't have, or the sea dragons don't have. Is it an evolutionary adaptation? Well, people that have looked at the armour and structure of a seahorse have said this, and they've tried to copy it, have said that they are biologically inspired designs, the work that they're doing using the seahorse design. They're saying they've got biologically inspired designs. And this is one of the troubles that the evolutionary people have, is that they cannot help but use words like design or even organise there, so that they're saying their armoured plates within the body are organised. So they just can't help but use some of these sorts of statements that really infer very clever design. But how can it be organised through evolution? This is a sign that I saw a number of years ago at the Melbourne Museum, which is talking about all evolution is marvellous mistakes. They're errors. So how can errors organise anything? I won't labour on that too much, as we've got a little bit of limited time. But in the research that one of these guys was doing on the seahorse tail and armour system, they say this: the square architecture is better than the circular one in the context of two integrated functions, grasping ability and crushing resistance. In other words, the armour of a seahorse is designed in the tail particularly to hold on to things. The square cross-section gives them a better capacity to hold on and grip compared to the rounded cross-section. And that just cries out design. But pipefish don't have prehensile tails. They can't curl up. And evolution says that pipefish evolved the capacity to have prehensile tails and became seahorses. So they also evolved pouches, because pipefish also don't have pouches in the males like the seahorses do. So this is another thing that evolved. So how does that fit in with reality? Well, creation says the opposite, that pipefish were either specially created as separate individuals, or they lost features that their ancestors had. So they don't have a pouch, as I said, they don't have a prehensile tail, and they rarely have this cirri growth that you can see on the seahorse picture there. And that cirri, by the way, a seahorse can grow it, lose it, and grow it back again. We're at a conference in the USA where a molecular biologist actually said that pipefish have become elongated in their body due to a degeneration in their genes. So this is actually a degenerative effect in the pipefish that has caused them to become elongated. So one should ask, well, is it degeneration that has caused a loss in the pouch and a loss in the ability for the tail to curl up? And maybe they've lost the cirri as well. And remember that intermediate ribbon Seadragon that we talked about, that has a half pouch, it has cirri as well. I think that seahorses certainly have degenerated in certain forms. There's still some beautiful creatures out there. The pygmy seahorse, as you can see here, appears to be a degenerative seahorse. It's very small. We're just talking about size in creatures, but it's a beautiful seahorse, but it looks very deformed just by even looking at it. And you find these throughout the South Pacific in particular. But this seahorse expert, Rudy Kuda, has also said that the features in seahorses and pipefish and so on seem to have degenerated in the fossil record. So just read that quote there in the yellow. In fossils, the various features that were common between different groups may have degenerated in modern species, such as certain fins. And some of the extinct forms represented links between different groups. So did live birth evolve? Well, I think we've talked about this on the show in the past, but in one paper looking at live birth in seahorses, where it's the male that gives birth, they actually make this statement that live birth has evolved more than 150 times in vertebrates and represents an excellent model system for studying the evolution of complex traits. Well, how can you evolve gradually complex traits like live birth? In the seahorse alone, which is probably a relatively simple example of live birth, it's still very complex. It needs things like gas exchange to be happening, waste removal. You've got to be able to transport nutrients to the developing embryo. You've got to get the eggs into the pouch in the first place. And all of these things have to be operational within one generation for it to be something that gives you a live creature. Anything goes wrong there, and you've got death, not life, and not evolution. So I think this is something that's impossible. Has a pipefish changed in the fossil record? Well, not much. There's a fossil pipefish we've got. So this is a result of Noah's flood. Then we must conclude that the changes between pipefish, sea dragons, and seahorses, etc., must have happened very early in the history of the world after creation. And Rudy Kuda admits this as well, that there's very little difference in the fossil examples of seahorses and pipefish to the ones we have today. Fossilized ancestors of pipefishes and their relatives from around 50 million years ago are very similar to the more elaborate family members today. So evolution is basically saying these things are evolving. If you look at the creatures on the right, they're saying they're all alive today, and they're saying it's going from the bottom up to the top, evolving, whereas creation is saying it's going the other way, that they're losing features, they're losing pouches, they're losing the ability for the curled tail, cirri, and so on. Is this an extraordinary faith to believe that they've evolved it? Because they actually don't have the evidence that they've evolved from anything else. Seahorses have evolved along different lineages well before the periods from which signathid fossils are known, says our expert Rudy Kuda. Well, that means we haven't seen anything. We haven't seen any evidence that they've evolved from any other creature at all. And here's just one to finish off with. This is a bit of a mouthful, but I'll give you the conclusion of what it's saying in a moment. In the Journal of Fish Biology, these guys said that despite their importance as evolutionary and ecological model systems, the phylogenetic relationships amongst gasterostoforms, which include seahorses, remain poorly understood, complicating efforts to understand the evolutionary origins of the exceptional morphological and behavioural diversity of this group. Now, what on earth does that mean? Well, I'll translate it for you. In English, it means we have no evidence that seahorses evolved from anything.